Next, we'll move on to Glen Donaldson. Glen, welcome. Bye, Tim.
Hello.
So Glen's our associate professor from the finance division, and he's our new champion for the finance track. So it will be quite interesting and exciting to see what Glen will share with us today. I'll pass the floor to you, Glen.
As Tina said, I'm the champion of the finance track, and finance is, I think of the four tracks that you're talking about today, finance is the oldest of the four, or one of the original tracks in the MBA program. It's a very interesting year for us because we're doing a refresh of the track. So we're introducing some new things into the track, which I think are quite exciting. So first thing to know is that finance is a core of business. So from new startup companies to large global enterprise, finance is at the core of running, growing, and leading those businesses. There are obviously other subjects as well, but finance is right in there. So it's an important thing to know. And in fact, no matter what track you take, you will get at least one finance course early in the program as a foundational piece. You can also specialize in finance, and in doing so, we try to answer a number of questions. For example, how do startup companies raise venture capital? How do they finance themselves? What do they issue? Do they borrow money? Do they issue stocks? And how do they know how much money to raise? So one of the things we have to do is figure out how fast we'll burn through cash. So that's a financial planning exercise as part of corporate finance. We also have to determine what to sell the shares for. If we're going to sell our shares to a venture capitalist, for example, what price should we sell them for? What fraction of the company should we give up to get the money? So that's a equity valuation question, which is a finance topic. Large companies face the same question. If they need to raise money, should they issue debt or should they sell equity? And if they do sell equity, what price should they sell it at? And what's the right kind of rate to pay on the debt? So these are all important finance questions. How do companies decide to do IPOs and to go public, for example? When Tesla went public, how do they make that decision? And what is the IPO process? These are the other kinds of things that we study in finance. What about mergers? So there's a merger wave going on right now, companies buying each other and merging together. So how does that work? We actually have an entire course called Mergers and Acquisitions that talks about that. How do activist investors influence decision-making? What about new things in corporate finance like carbon credits? So how do we design incentives in terms of executive compensation contracts and employee stock option plans? So what is an employee stock option and how does that work? These are all important questions in corporate finance that we deal with in finance track courses. We also deal with investment side of finance. So for example, what happened in the stock market today? The stock market went down quite a bit. So why is that? Why do stock markets go up and down? Some people said, oh, it's a risk off day. And on risk on days, I guess markets go up or the different kinds of stocks go up. What do we mean by risk? Risk has some very specific meanings in finance. And how do we quantify risk? And how do we relate risks to rewards and expected returns from investing? So, how do we value a share of stock and how do we construct the portfolio? What should we put in our portfolio? We're going to buy stocks in a bunch of different companies, and countries too. How do we decide which ones to buy and stick in our portfolio? How do we choose what way to diversify, both internationally and also across, different kinds of stocks, for example? And how do we manage the risk in investments or in business operations? So if you're operating a company in Canada, but you're selling your products to Japan, and you're going to have some of your income coming in Japanese yen, you care a lot about the fluctuation between the yen and the dollar, because that can determine how much money you get at the end of the day after you convert your yens into dollars. So you have to be quite concerned about currency fluctuations. Green investing. You hear people say green investing. What is that? There's actually things called green bonds you can buy, where the money goes to finance environmentally advantageous projects. So those get priced a little differently, and we need to understand how that is. What about interest rates? Interest rates are rising right now. So it's partly because quantitative easing is coming to a close, and we have to understand what that is and what makes interest rates go up and down, because it affects a lot of things like house prices. So there was an article today in the news that interest rates in the United States are at almost 4% for a standard mortgage, and that's beginning to affect the price of houses. So we need to understand, why would the value of a long-term asset change when the interest rate changes? It's got something to do with discounting, and we have to understand how that works. And what drives currency exchange rates? And how does all this impact global bond and money markets? And how, if we're managing a business, how do we manage the risk of these kinds of fluctuations? Okay, or make international borrowing and investment decisions. All these are important questions. In terms of financial institutions, how do they work? What exactly is a bank, and how does it work? We all deal with banks, but we need to really understand what goes on inside them and how they determine things like credit ratings and whether to give a loan or not and what rates to charge. And how do investment banks, which are different than commercial banks, how do they create new financial instruments? Some of these instruments called CDOs were behind any of you saw the movie The Big Short. That was involved new financial instruments created by investment banks. So we need to study that. In fact, that's one of the examples we use in one of our classes. In fact, our introductory class that I teach, I use that as an example. We also need to understand, what is money, what's currency, and what's a cryptocurrency, and is a cryptocurrency currency, and how does all that work? And what is the role of new money, things like dark pools and SPACs and shadow banks and things like that. And then we need to understand how we, as firms, governments, or entrepreneurs, or individuals even, evaluate and decide on lending against investment projects. And of course, finance is one of the most rapidly evolving areas in business. Introduction of things like crypto. What is the value of crypto, and how could it replace fiat currency? And if so, what would happen? What about decentralized finance? We call it DeFi. So the ability to borrow and lend directly, bypassing financial intermediation. So, how does the international payment system work? So things like Apple Pay and stuff. How is that different than buying things on a credit card? And how does the money flow around the world, and through what process? In the investment realm, there's now robo-advisors, artificial intelligence, and other things that help people create investment portfolios. How exactly does that work? And of course, the role of big data and information and finance, leading to things like quant strategies and smart betas and meme stocks and things like that. These are all kinds of things that we investigate. The Robin Hood effects, remember Robin Hood and the order flow trading and all these kinds of things emerging. The world of finance is really changing rapidly, and people who know how it's changing and how to understand that are valuable in the marketplace. So that leads us to what kind of careers do people get in finance? Well, as I said before, finance touches pretty much every area of business, and no matter what area of business you're in, it's very useful to have finance tools. So you'll see in some of the other tracks, I'm sure the folks that came before me talked about taking electives in different areas. Lots of people take electives in finance, even if they're not in finance. Of course, people in the finance track also take finance, but people from other tracks typically take some finance courses because of their importance. So here's a picture. You probably can't see everything, but you can go and you can look at it on the web. And this gives you some indication of sort of classic roles in finance, including back office, middle office, retail, banking. A lot of our graduates go into banking, for example, go into stock trading and money management, and also corporate finance, helping to run companies and raise capital. So in terms of corporate finance, you're basically solving problems and creating value. So you're financing new startups, you're financing large international enterprises, their international expansions and things like that. Strategic planning, a lot of strategic planning centers around what will happen in the future and what's the value of that today, and how do we make those decisions? And that involves finance tools like present value analysis and things like that. Financial planning, we talked about that. Risk strategy and management. How do we manage the risks that we face as a business? ESG as well is a important and emerging area of finance. That's very important to understand how that works. Money management. So mutual funds, hedge funds, pension funds, strategic advisors, private debt. Some of our people go and work for venture capital firms as providing money to young companies, for example. Private equity, private debt. Private equity and private debt are becoming more and more important. And they often hire people from finance. So green investing, things like portfolio formation and robo-advising and AI and things like that in the area of money management. Banking, I've mentioned that. There's services for companies and governments and individuals. Investment banking, the investment side is involved in the trading of stocks and bonds and derivatives like options and futures contracts. Mergers and acquisitions, initial public offerings, underwritings, restructurings, all these are areas of investment banking. Commercial banking is involved in lendings, savings, helping companies with their cash management, advisory service, working through the payment system, as we discussed. And of course, finance is a key skill to have in executive leadership. So lots of CEOs, CFOs need to understand a lot about finance. And boards too. Boards need understanding governance and incentives and decision-making. It's important to have those finance tools. So as I said, you can see finance cropping up in lots of places. So what are recruiters looking for? Well, what they tell us is that they're looking for people who have a strong foundation in finance for a number of roles, even outside of finance roles. Just having an understanding of how to increase or decrease profits or value and the profit risk trade-off. What's the risk and reward trade-off of undertaking a new line of business, introducing a new product, starting a new project? These are important things to understand. What's the value of an innovation option, for example? How do you value projects and assets? What are the effects of international currencies and markets? And understanding how business deals work. And fintech, financial technology, very important area. Understanding what that is and how that's changing the world of finance and business. These are all important in a wide range of roles and decision making. So recruiters are also looking for people with critical thinking and ability to confront new problems. So like I said, business is evolving quickly. People need to be ready to face those new challenges and think critically and creatively. Being able to do things, analyze data and numbers, have good oral and written communication skills and ability to lead effectively, and also work in teams. You have to be a team leader and a team player. Understanding and shaping incentives and behaving responsibly and ethically. So these are all things that are people search for when they hire, when they're hiring. So recruiters look for. So working in finance is a dynamic field. There's lots of very talented people working in finance. There's a variety of careers and mobility across different jobs, from entry-level positions to senior executives, and from small startup companies to large established enterprise firms and global businesses and governments. There's potential for career growth and earning high income. Finance has some of the highest incomes in business. And also to work in teams and work independently. And good hard work is rewarded. There's international opportunities. Finance is a global field. People often travel around the world doing finance jobs. There are the Career Center at UBC has lots of information about jobs in finance, including leadership and banking and corporate finance and new ventures and money management, finance technology. And UBC has a very strong track record of placing our graduates in roles like this. And the Career Center is better able to give you examples of that than I am, but there's quite a track record of success there with the job placements. What's in the finance track? Well, there's a number of topics get covered, and these line up with courses. So for example, the first course you take in finance looks at fundamentals like financial assets and decisions. So what's a stock, what's a bond, how are they valued? What are derivatives like options and futures? How do they work? How are investment decisions made? Then you move on to other areas of investigation. We have courses in corporate finance, including financial valuation and planning. That's the first corporate course that people typically take, that looks at company and project valuation. What is a company worth? What are its shares worth? If it's raising money, how does that company get valued when it's doing an investment deal? And looks at financial modeling and planning. How do we know how much money we need and how much money we should raise? How can we forecast that and then model that? We have topics like currency and banking have traditionally been in our courses, but we're actually launching a new course exactly focusing on this topic this coming year. That's looking at banks, credit, money, foreign exchange, crypto. And then on the investment side, there's have an investments course where we look at investment strategies. This is being broadened now to include areas of financial technology like artificial intelligence and robo-advising and rapid trading and iBuying and things like that. Venture capital, there's a finance course in venture capital. It looks at raising venture capital, securities that get issues, how venture deals are structured. Mergers and acquisitions, as I mentioned before, that's BAFI 507, M&A. Look at company acquisitions and buyouts and leverage buyouts as an example. And then finance frontiers, things like risk management, quantitative strategies, ESG, valuation of trading of carbon credits. Some of these very interesting and exciting topics on an international basis and also in domestic markets. So as I'm sure others have told you, picking an MBA career track does not limit you to only taking courses from that career track. So there's your core courses that everybody takes in the first, I guess, two periods 1 and 2, which is sort of from the September to December timeframe. And then you start branching out from there. And now in that core area, you take a finance class, and you also take accounting and economics and ethics and statistics and those kinds of things. And then after that, you take 4 post-core courses from your track, in this case, finance, plus an additional 10 electives, which could be from finance or they could be from other tracks. So there's an interesting course in entrepreneurship, for example, called Entrepreneurial Finance, which some people like to take when they're in finance. There's other interesting courses that you can take from these other tracks, and the tracks overlap in many important ways. So for example, part of doing entrepreneurship is raising capital, and to do that you have to know what your company's worth. So that leads to the valuation and the financial planning part. You have to know how much to raise, how fast is your cash burn, and how to finance that corporation. So the technology and leadership track obviously is going to care about things like fintech and some of this modern banking things around crypto and payments mechanism. So there's lots of overlap between these tracks, and it's yours to choose how you combine that. Over to you, Tina.
Thank you, Glenn. Great presentations. It's very clear to a lot of audience that what kind of courses they will be taking, and also there are actually a lot of questions for you on the Q&A. So if you can open up the Q&A, and there are actually quite big questions ready for you to answer. I can read out to you that the first one said, do you need to have a solid background in finance if someone chooses this career track without finance background? How difficult will it be?
There's no assumption that you know finance before you get into the track. So the first course assumes no knowledge of finance. So we've had many successful people who have come in that don't have a background in finance, never done finance, never taken any finance. So you're not expected to know it before you get here. Okay. Great. So you take preparatory courses in your first 2 periods. So you do things like accounting and statistics and economics and other topics like that to prepare you, but you don't have to know it coming in. Okay.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Glenn. And move on to the next one.
Yep.
So Hong asked, if I do not have a Canadian, North American working experience, but 10 years Asian work in the Asia working experience after graduation in the MBA solder program, what kind of career is she looking into marketing, especially in Canada? And does she have to start at entry level?
That's a good question for the marketing folks. I'm a finance guy, so that I'm not the best one to answer that question.
Okay, I'll direct that question to probably Tim. Thanks, Han.
No worries.
Let's move on to the next one. So there are actually a couple ones asking about the CFA. So
Yep.
what kind of overlapping between the CFA and the finance track? If you can give some insight.
Yep. The CFA track, the CFA is a very interesting certification. It's narrower than finance. So the things you learn when you're going through the CFA program, there's finance in it, but it's not the full range of things in finance. So the field of finance is broader than just what's in the CFA. And we try to cover that breadth in doing a finance MBA.
Yeah, it's good to know.
Yeah.
We do, so from in addition to the question, I do my chat with the students, and we do see quite a bit of our applicant have the CFA, either level 1, 2, or even, with level 3 certification. So, I mean, that's obviously good to have because they do have that specialty that you're looking for, but at the same time, finance track will provide a broader range of the skill set they are, they need to have.
And to be clear, you don't need to have a CFA background to do the finance track. In fact, if you already have a CFA, there's still lots of things to learn in the finance track because those courses are broader, right? And if you don't have a CFA, you're not disadvantaged because the courses are designed to start from knowing nothing about finance. So don't feel like you can't take the finance track unless you have a CFA, because that's not the case. I'm a finance professor, for example, and I don't have a CFA designation. So it's and most people don't in many areas of finance. Many of them do, but many of them don't. Okay, so don't confuse the two. Make sense?
Glenn.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. In terms of investment banking firms hire over the years. Many MBA students have been hired by investment banks. So there's, I can think of several senior executives who are former UBC students. UBC has an excellent reputation for having a rigorous and program of training people well in the areas of finance. So investment banks are attracted to people with UBC degrees. UBC is ranked very highly in the world and very highly in Canada.
Great, thanks. Glenn, and are you looking at the Q&A, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can see it here.
Okay.
In the local Vancouver market, there are many people that go into banking, but there are also people that go into money management. So we have there are several money management firms in Vancouver. There are also people who work in the area of private equity and venture capital, both on the providing venture capital to companies side and also the side in which the company raises capital from the VC. So they work inside companies and also inside of finance providers like VCs. So there's, Vancouver's not New York or Toronto or London, so it doesn't have a financial center that's that big on the sort of money side. But our graduates go everywhere around the world, and there are interesting and exciting jobs in Vancouver as well. Okay, are the courses looking at blockchain? The blockchain's important in the crypto space, for example. So our banking course has a segment in it on cryptocurrency because it is looking at it as a currency, right? So you have to understand what it does. So is crypto is dealt with in the area of finance. I believe there's also a more technical course on the sort of technology side of it. More technical is not the right word, different kind of technical. There's the finance side, and then there's a sort of computer side. And the computer side, I believe, there's a course in the technology track that looks at something like that. And on the finance side, what is blockchain doing, and how is it recording and how does that claim to that asset get traded and valued and things like that? Those are finance questions that are dealt with on the finance side. The 4 courses in the finance track are corporate finance course, which is on valuation and planning, which is useful not only in finance, but in things like entrepreneurship, when you're trying to value companies and plan how much money you're going to need, or when you're trying to figure out what kind of projects to do in a project environment. There's also a course in investments, which looks at investments, including fintech, financial technology. How does that work on the investment side of things in terms of artificial intelligence and robo and stuff? And then there is a 1, 2, 3. What am I missing? There's also a course in estimation, empirical finance that's in the track. And then there's electives as well, if you want to take those. Yes, there's investment banking, BC, venture capital, private equity. There are all those things and commercial banking and fintech and startups. There's everything that Rodrigo asks. There are companies of all those types in Vancouver. Yes, I watch Bloomberg News.
Great question.
Yeah. There is real estate. There is real estate in Vancouver too. There's a vibrant real estate industry as well. Yes, I should have mentioned that before. Julian asks a good question. I think I've answered this CFA question about 4 times. So I refer you to my previous answer.
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
By the way, there's other designations you can get in finance. There's the professional risk manager designation. There are securities courses you can take to become a certified security analyst. So there's lots of designations you can get in the area of finance beyond just CFA. So I know at least a half a dozen. You could become a certified financial engineer. There's lots of things you could do that have designations that have courses attached, all of which are in different areas of finance. Right? And we touch on all of those areas in the finance courses and the general topics that we cover in the finance courses at UBC.
Great.
Excellent.
I think we're just about to wrap up. And thanks so much, Glenn. And thanks so much for sharing this information about the exciting finance track with us. And it's brand new. So hopefully whoever is interested, you can keep sending me questions. I'll pass to Glenn to send some feedback to you as well. And thank you again, Glenn. And I will just be sharing the last slide with you before you leave the session. Give me 1 second here.
Yep. And just to be clear, the finance track it's being refreshed, but it has been at UBC since the beginning of the MBA.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, for the clarification. So the last slide here is that if you have additional questions to the missions, for your application process, for the questions about the program, you are welcome to send an email to the mba@sauder.ubc.ca or to me, tina.hu@sauder.ubc.ca. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And with that, I would like to thank everyone. I'll just stop sharing here. I would like to thank everyone attending the sessions today, and a special thanks to our panelists. A sincere thank you to my colleagues and to each one of you to manage your busy schedule to be with us.